Good morning, everybody, and welcome. It's 9:30 and it's time for me to open this hearing session on Matter 6 relating to the Greenbelt. My name is David Troy and this is my colleague Rosie Morgan. We've been appointed jointly alongside Katie Child to hold this examination into the soundness of the Sheffield plan and to produce a report of our conclusions and recommendations with regard to its soundness. Before I begin, can everyone hear me? As the majority of you already attended previous sessions, I won't go through the full formal introduction, but we'll cover a few housekeeping issues. In terms of sort of practicalities, first just say, as well as the people around the table and those watching in the audience, the sessions are being filmed and live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. This link is available on the Local Plan Examination website. Hopefully everyone has a copy of the agenda already circulated in front of them. Can everyone ensure their mobile phones are switched off or turned to silence during the hearing sessions? I'll just turn to the Council now, just to go through any fire alarm procedures or any of the practical arrangements for today.
Good morning, thank you. Yes, there is no fire alarm planned for today, so if there is a fire alarm, it will be the real thing. In the event of an actual fire alarm, please exit by the door through which you entered and follow council staff down the stairs onto Union Street. Please do not use the lifts. If you have any access requirements, please let us know, as refuge and evacuation facilities are available. As the inspectors have said, this event is being live streamed. The audience will not be recorded, but if you wish to ensure privacy, the two back rows will be completely out of view of the camera. During sessions, please can those people not participating please keep noise levels to a minimum. Thank you.
Thank you. The hearing session will take the form of a structured discussion which we will lead on, generally following the agenda circulated. We'll invite people at particular times, but if you have something you wish to contribute at a particular point in the discussion, please indicate you wish to speak by standing your nameplate on its end. When you speak, you will need to press the button at the front of the microphone in front of you and turn it off afterwards and put your nameplates down. Does anybody have any questions at this stage? Okay, can I just ask the participants for the morning session just to introduce themselves? If I just start with the Council and just go around the table, please. Thank you.
Good morning. Simon Vincent, Strategic Planning Service Manager at Sheffield City Council.
I'm Sarah Reid, King's Counsel. I'm the Council's barrister.
Laura Stevens, Local Plan Team Lead at the Council.
Ellie Roden, Principal Planning Officer at the Council.
Mike Johnson, Head of Planning at the Council.
John King, Planning Officer at the City Council.
Good morning, Rachel Martin, ID Planning, representing HFT.
Good morning, James Hobson from JEH Planning, representing Fitzwilliam Wentworth Estates, St Paul's Developments and Mr and Mrs Housley. Thank you.
Morning, Matthew Good from Pegasus Group, here on behalf of Avant Homes.
Good morning, Mark Edgerly from Boyer on behalf of Barrett David Wilson Homes.
Morning, Andrew Rose from Sporforth, representing Ruler Developments and Strata Homes.
Good morning, Chris Darley from Lichfields, representing CEG.
Morning, sir. Adam Key from Savills, representing Norfolk Estates.
Roland Bolton from DLP Planning, representing Inspired Villages and Hallam Land Management.
Good morning, Joanne Harding from the Home Builders Federation.
Okay, thank you very much. So just wanted to introduce before we go into the full agenda, just give you really sort of a bit of an update really. from following last week's hearings, really. Obviously, we discussed in some detail the appropriateness and justification for the Council's strategy for focusing development in the urban area and to retain the Greenbelt boundaries largely intact, apart from the one small Greenbelt release at the former Norton Aerodrome allocation SS17. At the Matter 3 hearing session and parts of the spatial strategy session in particular, there was a lengthy discussion about the role of the Greenbelt around the city and whether there was a need to protect the Greenbelt. Provides clear reasons to restrict the overall scale of development as suggested for both housing and employment. During those discussions, we also touched on some aspects of the Greenbelt review methodology, how the Greenbelt parcels were assessed and scored. As a result of that discussion, the Council have agreed to undertake some further work on the Council's Greenbelt evidence. The Greenbelt review appeared to identify a number of poorly performing Greenbelt parcel sites, but the conclusion regarding the overall scoring and the exact locations of the relatively weak performing sites are not clear. So we've asked them to do some further work, which they've agreed they'll be able to do. They've also agreed at the hearing sessions last week to undertake some further sustainability appraisal work regarding reasonable alternatives for scale and employment as part of the proposed addendum, which we discussed further at the Matter 5 statement, Matter 5 employment session this week as part of the integrated impact assessment, plus consider sustainably located smaller greenbelt sites on the edge of the urban area as further reasonable alternatives as part of a proposed addendum. So obviously that's where we are so far. Just a reminder that we are going to be holding separate hearing sessions in stage 2 in September on the general site selection process. So we'll not be dealing with that today. The former Norton Aerodrome site as well, which is supposed to be removed from the Greenbelt, we'll cover under Matter 14 in the Stage 2 hearings. So just moving on to today's agenda and what we will be covering. Obviously, item 2 is the principles of the Greenbelt, which I will lead on. Most of you were here last week and obviously attended various sessions, including the Matter 3 housing session, so we don't want to repeat the matters already discussed. So we've already covered many of the points under item 2 on the agenda in today's discussion, so we're not anticipating this item should be quite a shortish session. But I have some additional questions, particularly in relation to optimising density. One of the requirements in terms of looking at regional alternatives in terms of the Greenbelt. Having said that, if there are any additional points about the principle of Greenbelt release that haven't already been discussed or you weren't here last week, please feel free to comment and raise any points during that part of the agenda, so we can discuss that. Item 3 is related to the Greenbelt review methodology, and Rosie Morgan, my colleague, will lead on that. As already mentioned, we already touched on the Greenbelt review study last week. So we'll look at certain aspects of the methodology in more detail, in particular the testing of parcels against the Greenbelt purposes, which are listed in paragraph 138 of the framework, of the National Planning Framework. Then we will have some more specific questions on how the sites have been tested. These first 2 items are most likely to be of most interest to people around the table and will probably take up most of the morning session potentially. Item 4 is to do with the Greenbelt additions and deletions, and we'll both be covering that item. As a separate matter, it's not related to identification of land for development. The Council is proposing a number of additions and deletions to the Greenbelt boundary. Under item 4, we'll look at the Council's approach and whether the proposed alterations are justified and supported by evidence, which has demonstrated that exceptional circumstances exist. We've been through the list of proposed additions and deletions. Many are very small, minor changes, but there are a few which we'd like to ask the Council about in a bit more detail, which we've listed on the agenda. Item 5 is to do with policy GS2, is development in the Greenbelt. My colleague Rosie Morgan will lead on that, with focused questions on the Council's proposed modification to this policy, which is contained in Part 2 of the Sheffield Plan. Finally, we'll obviously deal with any of the matters, any of the comments under item 6, and then as a wrap-up under item 7, the closing session with the Council, and make sure it's clear that all the action points and modifications to the plan which have been discussed during all of this week's sessions will be covered. So I'll just now move on to, unless anybody's got any questions, I'll now move on to the main part of the agenda for today, starting with item 2. Just in terms of the Council's statement, obviously outlines that before concluding whether or not exceptional circumstances changes the green belt at the strategic level. They've looked at all reasonable alternatives for meeting the identified needs for development to be examined in accordance with paragraphs 140 and 141 of the framework, including making use of possible suitable brownfield sites and utilised land, optimising density of development, and discussions with neighbouring authorities about whether they can demonstrate, whether they can accommodate any of the identified need demonstrated, but has obviously been discussed through the due to cooperate and statements of common ground with the neighbouring authorities, which we've looked at under examination in the due to cooperate state sort of parts of the sessions. Just looking at one particular part of the what the council will need to look at, just in terms of optimising the density of development. I've just got a question arising really from the evidence. Really, the Sheffield Housing and Economic Availability Assessment, December 2023, exam document 3C, states at paragraph 3.340 for Sheffield. For most locations, the assumed densities are based at the end, the bottom end of the density range usually required for the Sheffield local core strategy, and therefore requires reflects a conservative estimate of capacities in terms of those density assumptions that have been set out in the basically in Appendix 1 to the effectively to the HELA. My question really is, obviously, I suppose, do those conservative, does the conservative approach that's obviously set out in the HELA taken by the council and the density assumptions conflict with the government's policy to optimise density and maximise the use of brownfield sites in the urban area in relation to Greenbelt? I'll just repeat, obviously, the paragraph 340 of the exam document 3C, and there's just a paragraph there that it's repleted at various places where the council have indicated that they're going to reflect conservative estimates of capacity, and the density assumptions are set out in Appendix 1 to the HELA. So it's just really your reflections or discussions about whether those that approach that's taken in terms of density assumptions conflicts with the government policy in terms of optimising density and maximising the use of brownfield sites in relation to greenfield sites.
Sorry, we're just bringing up the right document there. I'm going to introduce my colleague, Mrs. Howden, to explain in a bit greater detail about how that flows through the capacity work that we include in the HELA.
Hi, thank you. So I suppose to try and answer your point about the conservative estimates, it might just be worth setting out a little bit of context about how we got to that point in that paragraph. So I'll just take you through the exam document that you've referenced, 3C. So just to go through, I suppose the starting point was the evidence that we've got to show all reasonable options for meeting future development needs has been examined. And to give a bit of context about this extensive work, which is the HELA, has been carried out during the plan preparation. So just to take the healer to start with, so exam 3C. So in terms of getting to the point of the capacity assumptions, the council, as a starting point, has undertaken several call for sites that has maintained, and we've maintained a database of sites for over 15 years. So table 2, I'm actually looking at exam 3A, but it's probably the same table in exam 3C. On page 10 of exam 3A. So that initially looks at the types of sites to start with. No, it's all right, interrupting my flow. No, it's fine. So just to give you a bit of context, I suppose, of where the sites initially have come from. So I've mentioned the call for sites, which we've issued in 2009, 2014 and 2019. There's also various sites put forward through Reg 18 consultations, going back to 2009, 2010, 2012, 2015. We also have various sources of sites that come through planning applications, previous healers and ELRs, along with Brownfield Register, and also our ongoing monitoring of council sites. Also going into the mix of sites, we looked at excluded areas. So although generally these have been excluded from the sources of sites, any exception was made where it related to a site that was proposed by a housing developer through the call for sites or the Reg 18 consultation. We've also identified brownfield and greenfield sites within the existing urban area. So this looks at undeveloped greenfield sites that were allocated in the UDP, vacant and underused sports fields and other green spaces that aren't being put to any other beneficial use. It's also worth noting that the open space assessment recommends that the starting point is that all open space will be protected unless it can be demonstrated that it is surplus to requirements. So that's document OS 02 to 16. So all the urban sites that were identified have then gone into and been assessed through the site selection methodology. We've also set out in our response to Matter 18, going into detail about the capacity assumptions. So the conservative density is still making efficient use of land, but I suppose our point is it's not overestimating capacity. One area where we have done further work, where I suppose we maybe haven't used as a conservative estimate, is our city centre capacity work. So the council commissioned work from Deloitte and Planet IE in 2019. So this took a much closer look at city centre capacity. And this accumulated in the Central Area Capacity Study, which is CC02, and also the City Centre Strategic Vision, which is CC01 in March 22. So this takes a more detailed look and follows a density-led capacity approach. So it looks at very specific factors such as existing heights, primary movement corridors, gateways, heritage topography. So the approach enables a calculation of a residential capacity, but it doesn't prescribe any specific sort of design outcomes on those sites. So just to be clear, the capacity presented in the central area has been incorporated into both exam 3A, so the 2022 healer, and exam 3C, which is the current 2023 publication of the healer. So just another point, as noted during discussions in Matter 2, we've also approached other local authorities in the Sheffield City region. I've made that point when I probably shouldn't have done, so I'll retract that sentence, that doesn't flow. So I don't know if anyone else has got anything further to add, but I suppose what we're trying to set out is we've set out a range. So although it's conservative for some sites outside of the central area, we're still making efficient use of land, and we've done further work in the central area, which is much more detailed and design-led, to give a more, what we feel, accurate capacity assumption.
Yeah, I think just to add to what Ellie said there, I mean, I think what we've tried to do is vary densities according to their accessibility. So the bottom end of the range does vary according to the accessibility, and we think that's consistent with paragraph 125 of the framework, which says that plans should use minimum density standards for city and town centres and other locations that are well served by public transport. And that's what we've done. So the plan does vary density ranges according to their accessibility, and we've used those same ranges in the HELAR in assessing capacities of sites. So I think what we've tried to reflect is that obviously on any particular site, when you're making assumptions about future development, the actual development, when an application comes in, it may be a higher density or slightly lower density. So we've tried to capture what would be an average, and what we're saying is we're not trying to over-egg it in terms of density. We're trying to be realistic about what we think might happen. So I think we are consistent with the framework. I think that was the main point I wanted to make there in terms of paragraph 125.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously something we'll probably go have a look a bit more at detail when we look at the site assessment process, and when we look at matter 18 in stage 3 and at stage 2, obviously in relation to housing supply. Just the supplementary question there is really in terms of the work on the priority neighbourhood frameworks and the detailed master planning in those areas. There was just a reference in the council's statement to that piece of work, and I just wanted an update on those, if I could, please.
Yes, I'll answer this one. So, yes, it's probably worth just providing a bit of context in terms of the work around that sits behind the priority neighbourhood framework. So, the city centre strategic vision sets the overarching vision for the future central area. And is the higher level strategy from which the priority frameworks are drawn. The decision on the location of the priority neighbourhood frameworks was informed by the central area capacity study. And I think what that enabled us to do was focus on areas with significant capacity for change, but also on areas where it was considered the scope to broaden the city centre residential offer. So the strategic vision itself, just to provide a little bit of background on that, was approved by the Cooperative Executive Committee in March 2022 following extensive public and stakeholder consultation, which took place across 5 weeks between January and February 2022. The vision is for a well-connected, high-profile city centre with a quality city centre environment that supports businesses, employment, residential and cultural opportunities. We'll obviously talk about this more when we get to the sub-area policies, but I think we wanted to just make the point that the priority neighbourhood frameworks was seen as an important step by the Cooperative Executive when approving the strategic vision. The framework documents that have been developed in partnership with Homes England, who also recognise the benefits of a long-term strategic approach that was being advocated in the vision. The frameworks were included as supporting documents for the Regulation 19 consultation, building upon the principles established in the city centre strategic vision, and provide a high-level master plan to guide future development in each of the 5 priority locations. So essentially, they are design-led, and so the densities that are used within those frameworks are based on analysis of the townscape and character of each of the local areas. The frameworks were also seen as important in terms of outlining the opportunities for the targeted catalyst sites, which are seen as having the greatest potential to accelerate regeneration and drive growth across the priority neighbourhoods, not least allowing uplifts in values that will be realised through the delivery to be captured across the wider framework areas and beyond. So the 3 priority locations are the subject of emerging master plans. So these are Furnace Hill, Neepsend and Moorfoot. These are at various stages of development. The draft Furnace Hill and Neepsend development framework is now complete and has been jointly prepared by the Council with Homes England. It informs and guides the delivery of these 2 catalyst sites in line with the Council's emerging local plan. The principles set out in the development framework were endorsed at the Housing Growth Board in April this year. The next steps will be to share this draft document with relevant landowners for consideration ahead of Homes England bringing on board delivery partners. A £67 million funding package was awarded by Homes England to Sheffield Council in March this year to help deliver the development framework and support the creation of 2 distinct and vibrant neighbourhoods. That was announced by the Secretary of State in March this year. Just to mention the Moorfoot Master Plan, because that's one of the other key areas, that's being developed in partnership with Homes England. The current programme indicates that an outline business case will be prepared by the end of this year. Extensive engagement continues to take place with landowners and discussions with industry experts has also taken place with respect to the Moorfoot building to ensure an appropriate strategy for the building is put forward. The master plan is expected to deliver the Moorfoot Catalyst site, which includes site allocations HCO3, HCO8, HC11, SV04 and SV16, and it's expected to deliver around 2,400 homes. So again, it's very much a master plan-led approach, allowing us to analyse the capacity and appropriate densities across those sites in more detail. Just to also mention a couple of other locations where master planning is taking place. The Castlegate priority location benefits from a larger regeneration project of the Castle site, resulting in a successful bid for government levelling up funding. The site obtained planning permission in May 2023 and work commenced on site in January this year, and it's anticipated to complete in summer 2025. Whilst this is less residential focused than other parts of the central area, it does recognise the importance of delivering commercial and cultural development in the city as well as open space. Finally, I just wanted to mention the Sheffield Midland Station and Sheaf Valley Development Framework. This is being developed in partnership with London and Continental Railways, the South Yorkshire Merrill Combined Authority, Homes England and Network Rail. The current programme indicates a period of public consultation in spring next year, allowing for completion of work on access, flood modelling and time for an outline business case to be developed to support infrastructure delivery. So again, there are a number of master plans and linking to the 5 priority framework areas that are being developed, and I think all this demonstrates the commitment that City Council has to delivering the strategic vision, which has clear political and public support, and the approach is carried forward through the Sheffield Plan in the sub-area policies, which we'll be talking about at stage 2. Success to date is being realised in no small part through partnership working, and we'd also want to recognise the work that the input that Sheffield Property Association have had in contributing to that work. So I think, sir, I will leave it there, but hopefully that gives you an overview of where the status of those different master plans and priority frameworks and how they fit with the approach in the plan as a whole.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Vincent. I'm going to just now open it up now in terms of the principal Greenbelt release. So, Mr. Good, do you want to start your questions in terms of this particular item? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, sir. I won't rehearse the things that we said last week because those are clearly already been gone through anyway. It was just picking up on the density conversation we've just had, and our client doesn't have a particular issue with the council if they have taken a conservative estimate, and the reasoning for that is essentially the plan is some way short of its local housing need at this point in time, and if there is flex in there to provide more, then that would obviously not be necessarily a bad thing. However, based on the conversation we just had, we do wonder whether that is actually the case or whether they are actually pushing higher and more towards the upper end. As we've just heard from the council, they've looked at the central sub-area in quite some detail, and they've said what they've thought in terms of capacity there, and that doesn't sit at the lower end of that scale. At least that was my understanding of what they explained. In terms of that, sir, I'd draw your attention to table 18 of the HELA, where it looks at the allocations within the plan. There are 16,949 gross in total, not including demolitions, obviously. So that's not a net figure. But within that central sub-area, I'll let you get there, sir, before I carry on. Within that central sub-area, there are over 12,000 of those 16,000. So what we're saying is 71% of that, of those proposed allocations are actually not at that lower end, so there isn't actually that much conservativeness, if that's a word, within the plan, and it's that concerns us, given that we're so far away from the LHN. It doesn't appear that there is much additional capacity that could be found within the urban areas, and it's that point, and I won't rehearse what we said the other day, but it's that point is the reason why we thought they should have considered other suitable alternatives.
Mr. Barley. Yep.
Thank you, sir. Bringing this back to the MPPF, I just want to draw your attention to paragraph 143. I don't doubt the council are seeking to maximise densities and supply from their urban areas and brownfield sites. If you look at what paragraph 143 says, and this is a paragraph about defining greenbelt boundaries, 143 subsection E says that plans should be able to demonstrate that greenbelt boundaries will not need to be altered at the end of the plan period. If we take what the council is saying at face value in terms of they're maximising densities, they're maximising their brownfield supply, and you look at their housing supply, it's self-evidently at the end of the plan period, the greenbelt boundaries are going to have to be revisited. So my point is I don't think they comply with 143E, that they're able to demonstrate that greenbelt boundaries won't need to be altered at the end of the plan period.
Mr. Bolton.
Just for those who weren't here last week, a quick review of what we think are the exceptional circumstances, and then I'm going to comment very briefly on the density issue that was a question you originally asked. In simple terms, we believe exceptional circumstances exist. The council are not planning to meet their housing need, and by almost 1,000 dwellings per year. They're clearly, on their own evidence, not going to deliver the affordable housing they need. They're not going to meet the need for family housing. They've suggested just some 1,800 family houses might be provided in the plan period, against a need which suggests 80% of the requirement is for family housing. They're not meeting any older person's housing needs at all. There's actually no allocation at all in the plan for any older person's housing needs. They've not looked at reasonable alternatives, including small-scale releases from the Greenbelt for housing. The repeated, we have to keep the Greenbelt steady because it's the only way to obtain urban regeneration. The Greenbelt hasn't moved really since about 1983. So we've had a number of good years of this policy, and we've seen where it's led us, and it's led us to, if you like, by the council's own admission in their own evidence, people having to move out of the city in order to meet their housing needs, and particularly family housing needs. So all those matters come together, we think, to represent exceptional circumstances. And in part two, your attention has been drawn to the Barnsley local plan inspector's report, and I would just draw your attention to paragraph 57 in that report, where it's stated not meeting or the need to meet the full housing requirement results in impact on the Greenbelt, and the justification for that is in paragraph 91, where the inspector goes on to say you've got tightly drawn Greenbelt, and you cannot meet the needs without going to the Greenbelt. In paragraph 92, the inspector accepts the release to release some 654 hectares, that's 2.2% of Barnsley's Greenbelt, in order to meet their needs. Paragraph 93, the shortfall in Barnsley was just 6,000, so only 6 years of what of the shortfall that we've got in Sheffield. And the level of PDL, previously developed land, being proposed for allocation was only 12%. So here we have a much more extreme example, and the council are trying to tell us that based on the same approach, the same Greenbelt approach, there is no justification for exceptional circumstances. There seems to me to be a complete mismatch, and we'll come on to that goes through, if you like, some of the other findings of that inspector. Now, obviously, you have to deal with each plan on its own, and I accept that, but it was the council who made the comparison. So I think it was worthwhile bringing to your attention that another inspector using the same Greenbelt approach has found exceptional circumstances exist in very, very similar circumstances to those that exist in Sheffield. Turning to the question you asked, which was really, has the council used, if you like, the bottom end of the densities or conservative assessments? You've heard what the council have done. They've done quite a lot of work, especially in the city centre and the framework areas, in order to assess what might be delivered from those sites. Also, from the HELA, you understand that the site capacity on some of them have been set by planning applications that have been made. So again, quite a good indication. The other point I will make is that quite a lot of the, if like need is going to be met by windfall, where there's no assumptions about the densities. Assumptions don't affect the windfall. It's just a figure that's being given to you. And going to the HELA Appendix 1, if you look at the assumptions that have been made, it's 300 dwellings per hectare for a city centre. And then edge of city centre sites is 140 or 70, depending on the characteristics of the site. And then for the other sites, it's between 35 and 50. Those are reasonable densities you would expect. 300 per hectare is a high density. 140 and even 70 are densities which are going to be mostly all apartments. 70 is a 50-50 split of apartments and housing, but it's I don't think the council are being particularly conservative. Those are high densities. Let's remember, most of the provision is being made in the city centre and edge of city centre sites, and most of the provision is being made at those what I think are high densities, and they're average densities. So, some sites will only be 4 stories high. They won't get anywhere near those densities. Others will be much higher. Thank you.
Ms Harding, thank you.
Thank you very much. I feel like much of what I was going to say has been covered, so I'm just going to try and summarise things and bring it together. Basically, I think we've all clearly set out previously that the housing requirements that the council have set of 2,040 dwellings per annum net is nowhere near the LHN, which the council agreed to, being 3,038 dwellings per annum, roughly 1,000 homes short each year. So bringing us on to paragraph 140 of the MPPF and the need for Greenbelt to be permanent and to endure beyond the planned period, I think it's quite clear that if housing need is not being met, and that is 1,000 homes short every year, that it's very unlikely that the Greenbelt can endure beyond the planned period if the council has to meet their housing need at any point, now or in the future. In terms of the exceptional circumstances, I think they've been very well set out by previous colleagues, but again, we would support that. The affordable housing need has been identified as 902 dwellings per annum. Again, that's a significant need that won't be met. The need for family housing, the need for older persons housing, again, the evidence clearly sets that out. In terms of paragraph 141, and what needs to be assessed through the examination in terms of the Greenbelt, the council have looked at using as much land as suitable brownfield and underutilised land as possible. Again, has been set out by previous colleagues. Table 18 of the HELA highlights the amount of development in the city centre, The Appendix 1 sets out the high density that actually is going to be used in terms of the assumptions that the council have made, so that 300 dwellings per hectare figure is quite highly likely on that significant number of homes in the central area highlighted in Table 18. Exam 3B, which is the Excel spreadsheet with the trajectory in, clearly shows those higher figures time and time again within that city centre, and there's significant numbers of dwellings that are being built at high density, so it shows that as much use of previously developed land is being made. I think the council highlighted previously in one of their statements that their allocations, 92% of them are on brownfield land at the moment over the plan period. So obviously they are making significant use of the brownfield land, as well as optimising that density. They've got policy NC9 that's emphasising that need to optimise density. And as we've seen in terms of their discussions with their neighbouring authorities, in terms of their statement of common ground, they have discussed whether they could release Greenbelt. The neighbouring authorities have suggested they cannot. So in terms of paragraph 141, the council have actually looked at all of those exceptional circumstances. So the next step as far as the HBF are concerned is that having looked at all those steps, having shown that they can do urban regeneration, their priority neighbourhood frameworks, the council's emphasis that they're making on those in terms of the master planning, their work they're doing, the partnership work in the Homes England funding and all the rest of it, clearly shows that urban regeneration will happen. So we think, alongside the exceptional circumstances, the fact the council have looked at all this evidence, the fact that they've got all this support for urban regeneration, there's no reason why they can't be releasing those greenbelt sites alongside that to support the other additional needs that they've got. So as well as supporting that urban regeneration, they could increase the affordable housing provided, they could increase the housing provided for families and older persons by looking to release a level of greenbelt sites. Thank you.
Mr. Edgley, I think you put your nameplate up next. Yeah.
Sorry, sir, completely ignored my own name there. Apologies for that. Thank you. I think what this sort of discussion is showing quite clearly is that we've actually reached a position and a point in time that probably everyone could have predicted around the sort of green belt and the council's approach to the principle of releasing the green belt. I think you look back at through the evidence, and a lot of the green belt evidence has been prepared over quite a long period of time. Some of it is dated back to 2014. So, and I think it's quite clear that the council have therefore taken this approach of a sort of a policy on approach to greenbelt release. So I think we're now at a point in this plan making process that the council probably knew was coming all the way along. We aren't going. We're taking this policy on approach. We're therefore not releasing greenbelt, but our evidence is also showing that we're not meeting our housing numbers as well across the plan area. And I again agree with other comments around the range of housing provided, and obviously we've made reps and contributions to the hearings on that in previous sessions as well. So I think that there's quite an interesting point here where the council have sort of taken this policy on approach to greenbelt release and said we can't release that, and therefore kind of moulded their approach to densities to try and fit that position and that starting point. I think that a reasonable kind of starting point perhaps for a local authority, and it does kind of echo what the NPPF says, but there's also lots of other elements within the NPPF which suggest to us and to our clients that the council should have taken a different approach throughout the plan making period. I think there's been plenty of time, there's been plenty of opportunity for the council to amend their approach, and others have mentioned, as we have as well, the different approach of neighbouring authorities. So, but Sheffield seem to have continued this kind of policy on approach, and I think it really is kind of kicking the bucket down the line and to the next examination or the one after that, potentially, in terms of properly grappling with the principle of greenbelt release in a meaningful and positive manner. Thank you.
Mr. Hobson, I think you next.
Thank you. I'll be brief because I don't want to repeat what's been said around this side of the table already, but support the fact that there are exceptional circumstances, not only for housing but employment, and we spent a full day a couple of days ago in relation to employment matters, in relation to the shortfall significantly in relation to logistics. But we had a wider discussion about the quantitative and qualitative aspects of employment and the ability of the council not to accommodate the level of requirement that's needed to support the growth of Sheffield. So I'd make that point. The other point was in relation to whether greenbelt boundaries would endure, and clearly I think the council have demonstrated that they are looking at and maximising brownfield sites and utilising those in an efficient way. So where do we go from here in terms of future growth? And that can only be delivered if a sensible approach and recognition is given to greenbelt boundaries, to consider not only the evidence of the need that's now, but also into the future. Thank you.
Mr. Rose.
Thank you, sir. Just a couple of quick points, sir, because don't want to repeat anything that's been said around the table today or has been said previously, sir. Just trying to, I think, just reflect and look at what's been happening over the last nearly 2 weeks, sir. So I think, coming back to your question around, obviously, paragraphs 140 and 141, obviously it says, make as much use of suitable brownfield sites and underutilised land. Clearly we've been talking about the capacity-led approach and why the council have actually been undertaking that. And that's the start of the process, sir. That's what we've been saying all the way along. The council have started that process, the process of actually what every other authority does that has greenbelt. You look within yourself, and then when you look at what the identified need is and the requirement, and then you actually identify suitable land to meet that need. We touched on the Greenbelt Review last week, and it was concluded. It's the start, it's what's been said, it's the start of a process, but there's nothing special there that comes out of the Greenbelt Review in terms of the quality of the Greenbelt and whether it needs to be protected beyond all else. One of the things that obviously we picked up, and obviously we've been chatting about in terms of employment land, is obviously the process that's been gone through when you look at the committee reports and the decisions that have actually been made. And I was looking at it last night, and you look at the addendum in paragraph 4.1, and obviously this touches back to the discussions we had on employment. Paragraph 4.1 of the addendum, which talks about greenbelt changes, it says, following the Co-op exec in Feb 2022, the spatial strategy for the Sheffield plan has been developed to take account of the preferred spatial option agreed at that stage. It was agreed that Sheffield's housing requirement should be limited to the number of homes that can be accommodated on suitable brownfield and previously undeveloped (greenfield) sites in the existing urban areas, and the release of greenbelt land for development should be limited to sustainably located brownfield sites. Under national policy, exceptional circumstances are needed towards the greenbelt boundary. But members conclude that those circumstances do not exist to justify the removal of greenbelt land from the greenbelt for development. But that is the point that I've been trying to make in terms of employment land, is that employment has been completely missed. It talks about housing, but yet there is a significant, it wasn't discussed, and there's a significant need and a recognised shortfall in terms of employment. And so when the decision was made and the decision moved on, they've only looked for housing, but that area has been completely missed. It's been accepted by the council, obviously, that there has been that shortfall and that flaw, and so obviously we await the updated SA and the updated integrated impact assessment. But I think there has been something has gone awry and something has been completely missed there. Clearly, we're looking at an urban capacity approach. We talked the other day in terms of matters 3 and matters 5. Obviously, the supply is diminishing, particularly in matter 5. When we went through the supply, obviously that supply is diminishing. And also, there's no duty to cooperate within the wider region. So therefore, the exceptional circumstances do exist in terms of employment land, and obviously exceptional circumstances do exist in terms of housing land. This is where most authorities get to when they're halfway through, or even less than halfway through, reviewing a local plan. They recognise that the circumstances here are no different to any other authority with greenbelt land. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Key.
Thank you, sir. Just really quickly, I mean, I don't want to repeat anything that's been said at all. Mr. Darley a few minutes ago took you to paragraph 143E, which is where it talks about greenbelt boundaries not needed to be altered at the end of the plan period, which of course is absolutely right. The other sort of additional point I wanted to make very quickly is about safeguarded land, and we've not really talked about that so far in any detail at this examination. But I suppose what I'm really saying is you know what our position is on employment and housing needs, and others around this table, so we don't need to go over that again. But the position is sort of doubly bad, really, because not only are the council not proposing to release greenbelt in this local plan, but they're also effectively saying we don't need to in the next either, by virtue of subparagraph E and also paragraphs 143C, where safeguarded land is talked about. It could be, I mean, it wouldn't be a position that we would agree with, because you know where we are for this examination, but it could be a position that the council adopted where they said, okay, well, we hear the need, what the development industry is saying to us, but we're still not going to release greenbelt sites this local plan, but we are going to use safeguarded land as part of it for the next local plan or an interim review of the local plan. That's not a position that I would push for in the interests I represent, but it's just a general observation that we've not really talked about safeguard land at all as a tool that greenbelt authorities often use. That's my point, sir. Thank you.
Okay, do the council want to respond, if they could, please? And if there's any, thank you.
Well, just a first point, we're not going to respond to points that have already been made in earlier sessions because the council set out its position in respect of those. Suffice to say, we don't agree with the points that have been made. Just a point in terms of the framework. I mean, one has to read these policies in section 13 of the framework together. The starting point is obviously paragraph 137, which sets out that the essential characteristics of greenbelt are their openness and their permanence. Permanence. The second point is that reference has been made by a number of people making representations to the requirement to be able to demonstrate that greenbelt boundaries will not need to be altered at the end of the plan period. Just to note that paragraph 143 deals with circumstances when defining greenbelt boundaries. So that is where there has been a conclusion, effectively, that there is a need to revise greenbelt boundaries and then defining those greenbelt boundaries. And the final point in respect of that is that in any case, of course, one has regard to the entirety of para 143, which includes, for example, paragraph A, ensuring consistency with the development plan strategy for meeting identified requirements for sustainable development. I'll just pass over to Mr. Vincent.
Yeah, it was just one very brief point in response to something that Mr. Rose said, and he suggested that the council did not consider employment land at all or the need for employment land as part of its decision making. Well, that's clearly not true when you look back through the committee reports. That was taken into account. But we do acknowledge we'll be doing the further work on, as you mentioned at the beginning, sir, around the the IIA and looking at employment growth options. But I just wanted to make that point. The council did take that into account when it made its decision to submit the plan.
And sorry, there is one further point in respect of the points Mr Rose has just made relating to the duty to cooperate. I think he said there's clearly been no duty to cooperate. The council has cooperated and has demonstrated that it's fulfilled its obligations in respect of the duty to cooperate, but of course the duty to cooperate is not a duty to agree.
Okay, thank you. Have you got, yes, Sarita?
Yeah, just a minor point I just wanted to come back on, response to Mr Good and Mr Bolton, just about the healer and Appendix 1. So just to sort of reiterate that the city centre capacity is, our position is it's a realistic capacity assumption, and it's based on the further work as we set out that's been undertaken, and it does reflect a range depending on the specific location and neighbourhoods that have been assessed. And we'll go into this further in our response to matter 18, and also we've got further questions on this for stage 3 for policy NC 9. Thanks.
Yeah, it's just a response to a point Mr Bolton made about windfalls. Of course, windfall sites will be subject to policy NC 9, which does set minimum density requirements according to accessibility in different parts of the city.
And so just for your reference, that's on page 40 of part 2 of the plan.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other points really in relation to the principle at this stage? Obviously we've gone through this in quite a lot of detail at this stage. So I think we, as expected, I think we fully understand both sides of the argument at this point in terms of from both sides. So I think we'll be able to take that information away, plus obviously the representations that have been made on this particular issue. So unless there's any other further points, we're going to sort of probably delve into the Greenbelt methodology in a bit more detail. We've got some questions on that. So I'm just going to hand over to my colleague, Rosie Morgan. Thank you.
Thank you. So, yes, as already discussed, we've already had some discussion about that. The Greenbelt review methodology. So I don't want to go into too much detail, but we would like to look at a few points, particularly concerning the assessment of the parcels and areas that have been identified in relation to the Greenbelt purposes. So, starting with purpose 1, checking the unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas. So, I think as we've discussed last week, the approach to assessing parcels against purpose 1 was based on a quantitative assessment, scored against the proportion of the parcel or area which adjoined the urban area and the potential for rounding off. Right. And the scoring for that is set out on pages 20 and 21 of the Greenbelt Review. But I think at last week's session, we also talked, or the council mentioned as well, that had been a qualitative element to that as well. I just wondered if you could explain in a little bit more detail about the approach that you'd adopted, and also whether there was a qualitative aspect and how that was scored and taken into account. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. So, yeah, in brief, the assessments took the form of both qualitative and quantitative assessment. So, in relation to Purpose 1 in particular, there's a measurement of contiguity with the existing built-up area, which is a quantitative element of the assessment. And then there's consideration of whether there are opportunities to round off effectively existing built form without allowing sprawl into the wider countryside. So that's the qualitative element of the assessment. I think you might find helpful in the Greenbelt Review itself, figures 4 and 5 provide illustrative examples of general areas, rather than smaller parcels, that perform really differently against Purpose 1. That's helpful to understand how that assessment has been made. I think it's important to note that, as with the assessment against all of the purposes, the process isn't solely mechanistic. So we've given opportunities to apply robust professional judgment as part of the officer appraisal, but also whilst using consistent criteria to aid the process and also to prevent inclusion of erroneous results. So, yes, as I say, we touched on this last Wednesday's session. I'm not sure there's a great deal more to say than that. I think simply measuring the length of the edge of the parcel that adjoins the urban area gives you an indication of how much of it touches the urban area and how much it represents an area that may or may not sprawl into the countryside. But I say that the judgment as to whether it then provides opportunities for rounding off the urban area is really by site visit and understanding the terrain and the context of the site. So that's incorporated into the scoring mechanism. Just for clarity, that's in terms of when we considered the general areas, which cover the whole Greenbelt, and where we were effectively looking at what role the Greenbelt plays, and also when we were looking at the smaller parcels, which effectively are considered in case there was need to look at land for development. Same scoring mechanism.
So you use the same methodology you use for the general areas and then the smaller areas as well? Yeah,
the same methodology is used, obviously, for smaller parcels within a larger resultant, a larger general area. There might be a different score, because clearly if they're only part of that larger, wider area, they might have different features. But yes, the same methodology is applied in a consistent manner.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any comments on that? No? Yeah, Mr. Darley.
Thank you, Martin. Just give me one moment. If I heard correctly in the discussion on matter 4 last week on spatial strategy, I think it was stated by the council that they felt that purpose 1 of the Greenbelt sprawl was, in their view, the most important purpose. So taking that starting point, and before we get into the methodology of the Greenbelt, which I've got some comments on how sprawl has been assessed. Table 2 of the Greenbelt methodology, which is on page 29, tells us that 9 parcels scored, got a 1 score, i.e. it's a weak roll. A further 19 scored a 2, a relatively weak roll. So we've got 28 sites scoring 1 or 2, weak or relatively weak roll, on a purpose that is, the council have stated is their most important purpose. I think it's an important point to recognise that in their overall conclusions that land shouldn't be coming out of the Greenbelt, because there's no that there are sites that they've identified for what they've said is the most important purpose are weak or relatively weak performers against that specific purpose. That's my first point. And then in terms of the actual methodology itself, my view is that the approach that's been taken in assessing purpose 1 within the Greenbelt Review methodology is just too simplistic. We've heard that it's quantitative and qualitative, but in my view it is very formulaic. It doesn't really allow greatly for professional judgment. Just comparing it to other similar methodologies, and the council refer in their matter statement to the approach taken by Barnsley, that's referenced at 6.61 of their statement, which also follows the common approach. If you actually compare how sprawl has been assessed within the Barnsley methodology compared to Sheffield, Barnsley is incredibly more sophisticated, looking at not just relationship to the existing boundaries, but other durable boundary features, and allows for much more greater level of professional judgment. I think it would be helpful for you to have a look at that methodology, and I recommend that the Barnsley Greenbelt Review methodology is included in the library, so you can do a comparison between the level of scrutiny given to this purpose by the Sheffield methodology compared to the Barnsley one, and you'll see there is quite a stark difference. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bolton.
Thank you. I think, as with all these things, there is a need of having both qualitative and quantitative assessments to be done. Unfortunately for you, where we have such a significant underprovision being proposed, and there are a number of emission sites being proposed, the only way you're going to reach a conclusion on this is by actually examining those emission sites, and that's what's being done by other local plan inspectors. Because, as has been put to you, there is a level of professional judgment, and we can all go around the table and look at the same site and come to a slightly different professional judgment on most of the Greenbelt purposes. Just to comment on the approach in Barnsley. The approach in Barnsley didn't just look at weakly performing sites. It allocated over 20 sites, a significant number of sites, which had a moderate impact on the Greenbelt. And that's my experience elsewhere, is when you've got this level of unmet need, you're balancing it not just against weak, but also against moderate or moderate to high levels of impact. Those are the types of difficult judgments that we have to make as planners, I would suggest. Turning to this particular issue, the example we put before you in our representations, it's a site in Dore, which is a garden centre, and under this unrestricted sprawl of built-up areas, the area scores 3, so a moderate score. It scores 3. It's got a built form. It's adjacent to built form, and has very strong boundaries. Now, obviously, being a garden centre, that can be said, well, that's an acceptable greenbelt use, rural use. However, to the common man and woman driving down Dore Road and Ringlow Road, Black House Road, this is part of the urban area. It appears as built form. So there is, I think, and this is why I say, unfortunately, it's a professional judgment you're going to have to make on the emission sites. But that's just an example. I think you do need to, if you come to the conclusion that there are exceptional circumstances, and ask the council to go and consider potential sites for further release, I think you are going to have to examine those and find out whether they're sound, unfortunately.
Mr. Good.
Thank you, Ma'am. I won't take up too much time. You'll see from our representations we're promoting a site which we believe performs poorly, and the council also believe performed fully against purpose 1 and 2. I think I'd just add to Mr Bolton's point, it's about sustainable development as well, and that's one of the key things which we must bear in mind when we're considering the plan and where development should go. Now, we don't have an issue with the council placing significant amounts of development in and around the city centre, because that's quite clearly sustainable in terms of its location. Whether it's viable is a question for another day, which I think we will discuss later. But one of the key points that we've mentioned, and I won't go into in detail because we mentioned it the other day, is around those other settlements which are also deemed sustainable by the council, and we've got particular interest in the Chapeltown area, which has a very low level of allocation because there isn't a great deal of space in and around that town in terms of brownfield. The Greenbelt's very tight, but yet there are sustainable opportunities that score lowly against the Greenbelt methodology. And it's that issue which is the crux of our argument, really, is why we did not consider, or rather, why the council didn't consider those sustainable opportunities when they were presented with them. It seemed very much a blanket no, and that's, I think, what the council's decision in it, which its members took, essentially said that there wasn't that opportunity to discover and consider other sustainable sites. And the unfortunate position we're now in is that we don't have those reasonable alternative sites in front of you. As Mr Bolton says, unfortunately that also means that you haven't got the opportunity to consider those sites unless you start to look at emission sites, which I think, and I would agree with Mr Bolton, is a task which needs performing at some stage.
Okay, thank you. Do the council want to come back on any of those points, and particularly, I think it was Mr Bolton's points about the methodology and and Mr Darley's point as well about the sophistication of the methodology and whether perhaps a more detailed approach, such as has been done elsewhere, could have been taken.
Thank you. Yes, I think there's just a handful of points to come back on. I think, firstly, while I'm just finding the right page in the Greenbelt Review, just to clarify what I think I said the other day, in that Purpose 1, along with Purpose 2, are particularly important in distinguishing between different parcels in Sheffield, or useful in distinguishing between different parcels in Sheffield, largely because most parcels score very similarly on the other two purposes that we've assessed. So I think that's just to clarify. So in terms of, yes, other places and whether they've done their Greenbelt reviews differently or better than us, I think it's important to note that there is a common approach that's been agreed at the sub-regional level to carrying out Greenbelt review. Clearly that doesn't set out a detailed methodology, because at the time that was written, obviously local authorities were at different stages in plan preparation, but it forms the basis for the broad approach to methodology. And if it's helpful, Section 8 of the Greenbelt Review does relate in some detail to how that's operated, and also some consideration of how other local authorities have carried out their own Greenbelt reviews, and where there are commonalities with ourselves. I think certainly don't have any objection to other local planning authorities' methods. I think certainly in relation to, I think it was Mr Bolton raised, or maybe it wasn't, in relation to Barnsley's methodology and the fact that they looked at sort of poorly and more weakly performing parcels of Greenbelt when they were looking for land to release in their plan. I think it's worth noting that what we've provided here is a robust assessment of parcels of land within the Greenbelt that would be utilised if we had found exceptional circumstances for releasing land from the Greenbelt. They would have been used as a tool, as one factor within site selection methodology. Certainly wouldn't dispute that there may well be sustainable locations for development that may be less weakly performing or more strongly performing within the Greenbelt. That would be one element of the consideration. I did have one other point. I think it was only a minor one actually, around, again, going back to the sort of the mechanistic nature. I think I would dispute that. In fact, I think we've deployed a really consistent approach to the assessment by looking at the sort of the qualitative and the quantitative aspects. It's worth noting that we've carried out a lot of site visits. We're familiar with this land. It's not simply a desk-based distant approach. I think Yeah, and that's recorded within the methodology section in the Greenbelt Review that's how we operated.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mum. Thank you. It's just a really quick point. I just want to put it on record. That's all. There's in paragraph 2.2.1 of our statement for today's session. I've got a reference in there. There's just an arithmetic error. I just wanted to bring to your attention to do with the scoring of our site, and that is in document GB2 and it's Appendix 3, and our site is SE2 in that appendix. The particular line is stated as adding up to 17. It doesn't. It adds up to 14. But that I just wanted to place that on record. That was all. Thank you.
Can I just go back to the council quickly on that particular point? It was a specific.
I think I have to go away and look to see whether that was accurate or not. I'm not saying there are no mathematical errors, although generally spreadsheets are used. So might need to come back and confirm on that. I'm not going to dispute it with you right now if the maths is wrong.
I don't think it's contentious. I'm just pointing it out. That was all. Yeah.
Actually, if you could just provide that reference again, because I didn't quite catch it.
Sorry. So this is in GB2 and Appendix 3. Which is on page 60.
Yeah.
Well,
and it's the
59 on the actual page itself.
It's SS2A.
Yeah. So it's SE2, and then you'll see. So it's 2 plus 2 plus 5 plus 5, which is 14.
It's 14,
not
yeah.
17, as stated there. Sorry, but it is quite important.
Yeah, I acknowledge that the maths there is right. Let me just check whether it's in the addendum or not, but I might need to come back to you on later on that. But yes, you're right. Your verbal maths is definitely right.
Okay, so you'll check on that one then. Yeah. Okay. I'm not sure who was next. Mr. Darley, is this another point about the methodology and purpose 1 particularly?
Just a couple of points coming back on what I was saying before. I only raised the Barnsley Greenbelt methodology example because the council rely upon it within their own statement, saying that followed the common approach and that was found sound by that inspector. But when you actually compare the methodologies employed for detailed site parcel analysis in that document compared to the analysis in the Sheffield document, they're miles apart. And that's the simple point I wanted to make. But some more general points. I think Ms Stevens effectively said, well, kind of paraphrasing here, this doesn't really matter, this methodology, because we haven't identified exceptional circumstances to remove land from the green belt. Well, I think this process we're going through in assessing sites, and the process the council have gone through in assessing sites, has got to form part of the overall conclusions on whether exceptional circumstances exist. And whilst we're debating the methodology, their own evidence does demonstrate that there are very weakly performing sites, particularly against this particular purpose.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bolton?
Just very quickly, the same point, the reference I made to Barnsley was that the council drew your attention to it in support of their approach. And just clarification, when I was talking about Barnsley, I said there are over 20 sites that have been allocated that scored 15, which was a moderate impact on the Greenbelt, not a weak impact. So the point I was making is not just those with a weak impact you could be looking at. You could be looking at moderate. Certainly in places like Welling and Hatfield, they looked at sites and recommended sites which had a moderate to significant impact, or moderate to high impact as well. and allocated those. Fewer, but they still did. So, and that brings us down to what other people are making and the point the council have made, which, if you are to find exceptional circumstances, is not just this scoring that will determine whether the site is sound or not.
Thank you. Mr. Rose, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Ma'am. Yes, but it's around sort of purpose one, obviously. I think that's what we're talking about. But also it's around, it's the robustness and obviously the methodology that Council have chosen. Obviously, I think within our submissions, Ma'am, and I think within our hearing statements for Ruler, obviously we've put in our own, we've done our own greenbelt assessment, which obviously for that site, which looks across pulls in examples from around the country in how you actually undertake, robust greenbelt reviews and how you assess sites. And obviously I appreciate lots of authorities have slightly different approaches. But clearly here we're looking at, they're trying to pull from the Sheffield City Region Greenbelt Review methodology, which is obviously dated 2014. Obviously some plans have progressed, some plans have been adopted. And then obviously we're looking at the methodology here, which is, I think, looking at the example in the back, Appendix 2 to that, is actually different, largely in the way, obviously, as you say, it's taking a very sort of mechanistic approach to how you actually calculate urban sprawl, in whether it's 3/4 adjoining, half adjoining, etc. It's like, where do you draw the line? Appreciate, planning judgments have to be made. But then when you look at the scoring parameters within the 2014, obviously one is, they've looked at, it says land unrelated and remote from main settlement. 5 is undeveloped land, I can't even read that, it's red on white. Undeveloped land immediately adopting the primary urban area, see what it says. But what I'm trying to explain is that it's obviously, it's a very different, you can't sort of say that that's sort of the base scoring, it's taking a much more sort of, you've got to visit the site, appreciate the site, look at where the site is and how you actually fits in with the urban area. I just have one question, obviously, relating to my site, obviously, which is actually adjoining the urban area and actually physically joins the urban area, then actually in the back, which I think, having looked and squinted at a lot of the plans, the council have actually scored it 5, which is actually does not adjoin the urban area. No opportunities to round off existing patterns of event performs a critical role. I think there's a disconnect there. I think there's a, the way they've actually appraised and assessed the site. Obviously, I'd direct you towards our appraisal that we've obviously appended to our hearing statements, but I actually think it's actually been assessed incorrectly based on this scoring system here, sir and ma'am. So I think that's my comments around the Greenbelt Review. Obviously, we picked up last week, obviously some sites haven't actually been assessed, some sites have been submitted. I appreciate that's going to get picked up, hopefully, as we move further forward. And actually, I think it was, as he said, it was a point in time. It didn't actually progress. It sort of largely assessed strategic large parcels, and then it's assessed some sites, not all sites. It's not really the rigorous and thorough sort of Greenbelt Review that usually accompanies a submitted local plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edgley.
Thank you. We've heard, obviously, the council talk around the qualitative and quantitative approach, the common approach across the city region, and the professional judgment and site visits and full understanding of the sites. And I think all of them are very reasonable, and we wouldn't expect to hear anything different, really, regardless of where we are in terms of geography and local authorities. But I think the thing that we can't sort of put a number against or judge or put on a sliding scale is this kind of inherent sort of bias, I suppose, that we all have, dependent on where we work, who we operate for, and who our clients are effectively. But I think, you know, that we've got to be mindful through that sort of professional judgment and the kind of the claim of a common approach, that, you know, picking up the point I made previously today, that I think the council have got to a point where they knew they were getting to this point. They haven't necessarily followed the evidence to this point. I think their starting point and their end point are very similar, in that we need to retain the greenbelt boundaries as they are. So I think where there is a judgment in terms of the scoring and looking at that sort of, you know, qualitative or quantitative approach, I think that kind of bias is in us all I think we all, you know, all as planners, we probably know where we're trying to get to in the end, and I think that's sort of very clearly come out of the kind of methodology, and in particular when we're looking at this sort of quantitative and qualitative approach, and you end up with this scoring. I think ultimately you do end up with a, you probably, if it's one or the other, you probably take the one that favours where you want to get to ultimately at the end. So I think, you know, that is a key consideration and a key flaw in the approach that's been taken so far. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Hobson.
Hi, just a specific observation about Purpose 1 in relation to how boundaries are assessed, existing and proposed. I think just drawing your attention to Greenbelt Review, the addendum, paragraph 2.3. I think there it was recognised that the scoring system didn't take into account greenbelt boundaries, and I think it seems a bit of an afterthought. It seems as if it's a bit of an add-on, and it's difficult to understand how that translates into an overall assessment of Purpose 4. So I think there needs to be more of a kind of an integrated approach in terms of how that happens. So Mr. Darley's mentioned this more sophisticated approach. It just seems a bit clunky at the moment that we've got these two assessments and how they work. And I'd draw your attention to the Kirtleys local plan and their assessment of Greenbelt. They did a thorough assessment of existing Greenbelt boundaries and compared that against proposed Greenbelt boundaries. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for those points. I think there's been some discussion about the approach using Barnsley, and perhaps it would be useful to have a copy of that, just to, as it has been referred to by all the parties, if we would put that on the examination library. Does Council want to come back on any of the points were raised, particularly in relation to looking at the boundaries and the kind of approach, and any of the points that have been raised actually that you want to come back on?
Yes, just a few things. I'll try and keep it as short as I can. I think just for clarification, I'm fairly sure I didn't say that the Greenbelt methodology didn't matter. I think I actually said that it was one element of site selection if you reach that stage. It certainly is quite an important piece of work. I think we've already set out that there are similarities and differences with Barnsley's methodology. Their methodology was obviously developed in relation to their local plan, but we do cover that in paragraphs 8.3 to 8.5 of the Greenbelt Review itself. Just checked in relation to large general area SE2, yes, there is a mathematical error in there, so I accept that maths there. Going back to, I can't remember whose point it was, around sort of understanding and knowing the sites, I'd just reiterate, set out in paragraph 6.13, we've visited all of this land, we've visited these sites in some cases many, many times. We're we're well aware of their context. Also, we did appraise all of the sites that we received. I've done a quick bit of analysis. I thought we might come back onto this later in the agenda, but all but one of the emission sites have been included within the Green Belt Review because they've all previously been either submitted, promoted to us, or they were already in there as general as resultant parcels anyway. I'm not going to go into specific scoring around the promoted site that Mr. Rose related to. Suffice to say, I'm fairly happy that we've followed our methodology correctly. Just in terms of timing, I can't recall whose point it was, and the fact that this appears to have been formulated to sort of back up our point about not wishing to expand the urban area. It's probably not overtly apparent from within the Green Belt Review, but there are references in there. The Green Belt Review was actually carried out starting in 2014, so the common approach was developed at the sub-regional level at that stage. And it was actually carried out following a decision by the Council in December 2013 to start work on a new local plan, including a Green Belt Review. And there are references within there, for example, to the fact that when some of the site visits were undertaken, and inclusion of additional sites when we did the call for sites in 2014. So I think it's apparent from the report itself that it was being worked on considerably in advance of the decision on the spatial strategy being taken just a few years ago. So it wasn't formulated to back up a position, I suppose. It was an intrinsic part of that evidence base. I think, a couple of final points. In terms of taking account of the boundaries, within the addendum, make reference to the fact that the scoring for Greenbelt boundaries wasn't explicitly included within the Greenbelt Review, so that's been clarified by inclusion of the criteria in the addendum. I think it's clear from the text within the core Greenbelt Review that the boundaries performed quite an important part of the analysis. Certainly when the boundaries for the parcels were drawn up, there's a clear definition of how we did that, and the fact that we were looking for robust, durable features on the ground to ensure that where parcels were being considered, if they were ever removed from the Greenbelt, there would be a robust boundary able to be drawn up there. I think sort of as a summing up point, although I'm guessing we might go through the other purposes, I think the whole reason for having a methodology is to provide a framework against which a professional judgment can be applied. And I think we've demonstrated that both throughout the report and the addendum, and hopefully through the discussion today.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hobson, did you want to come back again? No. Yeah. So, unless anybody has got any other points on purpose 1, I think it might be a opportune time to take a short comfort break. So, if we come back at 20 past, is that okay? Thank you. Right, thank you. Let's continue now with purpose 2, and just quite a simple question on this, hopefully. So the assessment against purpose 2 is a quantitative one, as I understand it, based on the measured distance between settlements. But paragraph 2.4 of the Greenbelt Review Addendum clarifies the approach used against this purpose to recognise that qualitative factors such as topography, landform and landscape features may also be considered. I just wanted to check whether this change in methodology has been taken into account in the final scoring, and if so, where is that information?
Yes, thank you. Yes, as you noted, we made a minor clarification to add the text that parcels would score 5 against this purpose, where the impact of development would be judged to result in a potential coalescence of 2 different settlements that are further apart due to specific topographical, landform or landscape features, and where there's a sensitive gap that requires protection. To confirm, the Greenbelt Review Addendum does include some amended scores, but it doesn't include any amended scores for this purpose. It wasn't necessary to make any amendments to the scoring for individual parcels as a result of the change in wording. There were no parcels where the qualitative judgment as added into the scoring mechanism actually made a difference to the score. So we recognised that the point being made, and we added that into the scoring, but there were no material changes to the scores as a result of it once we'd reviewed those parcels. So just to clarify there, there was reconsideration of parcels that were scoring 3, 4 and 5 to check that didn't make any difference to them.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. So, Mr. Hobson, do you want to make a point in terms of
yeah, just
two?
A quick point. So, just in terms of the revisions, is then the converse true that if a site should score 1, if that parcel improves, that it's not to result in coalescence due to the specific topography? I think it's loaded negatively. I'm just wondering whether there may be instances where a site scores improved as a result of looking at the topography and the landforms and features.
You want to come back on that, or?
There are no further changes to any of the other scores as a result of that. I suppose what I would say is that because of the size of the gaps that we've included within the scoring, the reason that only that one was changed was because the other gaps are generally wider, and actually there's relatively few parcels of land that fall into the category of being within really narrow gaps where that would be a key indicator. So I suppose the short answer is no, there have been no changes to other scores.
Does that answer your question? Thank you. Mr. Bolton, did you have a point on purpose 2?
Yes. And I suppose it's firstly is you're hearing about the scoring of parcels rather than of sites. So you're not looking at any mitigation that could be placed. And I know that's a point further down. But I suppose it's a point to be made. How would a proposal be scored if there is existing clear intervisibility between 2 areas? I'm thinking about Chapeltown and Sheffield, which you heard last week. Actually, part of the northern part of Sheffield was contained in the Chapeltown area when it was being looked at. So the council at times see them as being coalesced already. But there's strong intervisibility between the 2, but a proposal that actually reduces that, or in fact prevents any intervisibility between the 2, although moving physical development closer how does that end up being scored? Because it seems to me part of the intervisibility is not just about the measurement, it's all about the visual intervisibility. You don't drive down the road or walk down the footpath and say, oh, beyond that tree belt, I know there's a settlement, therefore I feel enclosed. You walk down the road and say, well, actually, there's a tree belt on my right and an industrial estate on my left. I don't feel enclosed. I don't feel enclosed on the right-hand side at all. So, just the question is, how does that score?
Do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, sorry, I was waiting to see if anybody else was going to raise anything further. Yes, I think we have set out in the methodology how the gap between different towns, as it's set out in the framework, is considered, and we've listed the towns within and without Sheffield that are included there. A second. In terms of the gap between, that's defined in paragraph 517 of the Greenbelt Review. In terms of the specific gap between Chapeltown and the main urban area of Sheffield, Mr Bolton's correct in that they are different settlements. I think as we discussed during the spatial strategy matter the other day, Chapeltown is a principal town. There's albeit narrow, a quite clear open gap between the southern extent of Chapeltown and the northern part of the main urban area. So I won't find the exact score right off the top of my head now, but it will have certainly performed highly in relation to Purpose 2, the parcels of land within that gap. So I've just been reminded that in the addendum on page 8, there's actually one of the comments made during the Regulation 18 consultation was around the distance between main settlements, and that being too simplistic and a sort of scale rule approach, and that it should consider visual function. I think Mr Bolton alluded to the fact that there's an industrial estate, for example, in the gap between Chapeltown and Sheffield. So we accepted that there are circumstances where distance alone might not be the best measure of whether settlements might merge or whether gaps would be narrowed, but it does provide an important starting point in indicating where settlements are close and where there are gaps that could potentially be unacceptably narrowed by development. That's what resulted in the change in the text to that scoring. But so going back to the example of Chapeltown specifically, there's a clear green gap between that as a principal town settlement and the main urban area, and so parcels that fall within that gap will be scored accordingly in relation to that purpose.
Okay, so just to clarify, you did take account of the visual impact, but that doesn't actually affect the scoring when you look back at the scoring.
It hasn't altered the scoring, no. But yes, we have reconsidered the visual aspects, again, through site visits. We've got planning officers within the team that cover different areas of the city who work on those sort of factors.
Mr Bolton, just to come back to you there.
Yes, I did get my answer. My question was, did they take into account mitigation being proposed? And the answer is no. So I'll deal with that when we come and deal with the Chapeltown session.
Okay, Mr Rose, have you got your...
Thank you, ma'am. On Purpose 2. So yeah, again, it's quite mechanistic, and I think Ms Stevens obviously touched on a couple of points I was going to pick up, and I'll just go with them. I think, obviously I picked up the fact that criteria 5 has some extra judgment on it within the addendum, which obviously goes around, if I read it correctly, around the sort of potential coalescence of different settlements. It's obviously bringing in that qualitative argument, I think, around that. And I think that creates a little bit of an inconsistency then when you get to scores 1 to 4, because obviously that seems to be fairly sort of mechanistic in terms of obviously the distance of the gaps between the different, as they're calling them, settlements. So obviously then it comes down to that it won't erode it to less than 2 kilometres, it won't erode it to less than 1 to 2 kilometres, 500 metres to a kilometre, less than 500 metres, and then obviously there's then now been amended in terms of 5 around that sort of trying to bring in that less sort of around the topography, landscape and features and things like that, which I think applies to other distances as well. And distances between other settlements. I'll pick up one, which is obviously Chapeltown to Thorpe Hesley, which obviously has the M1 in between. It has physical features, and obviously there are other features on the other side of the motorway as well. But then when you look at that, and obviously the description also within the MPPF is towns, and I just want, and obviously Thorpe Hesley isn't a town within Rotherham, it's a village. So I think there's a distinction there as well. So I think therefore clearly where you've got motorway, physical barriers, you've got undeveloped fields on the other side and things like that. I think that's where you're, and obviously it's not a town, it's a village. I think that again there needs to be a little bit more of a sort of a qualitative angle or a recognition of the actual environment that the actual site or parcel, as we are talking about here, lies within. And I think there needs to be some context within purpose 2. Thank you. I also, just one last point. Obviously, there doesn't seem to be any sort of, in paragraph 5.19, around the, obviously, we've fallen on 500 metres. Obviously, Woodhouse to Swallownest seems to be 600 metres. But how we actually arrived at 500 metres as an essential gap, it's, or what that actually is within context. It just seems to have just landed. And then the other ones, obviously, within the other purposes, 1 to 2, over 2, I think it's just, there needs to be some sort of evidence around these kind of scoring system.
Okay, thank you. Council, do you want to come back on Ms. Stevens? There's a point about how you arrived at the 500 metres, amongst others. You have to come back on
thank
that one.
you. Yes, I'll try not to come back on too many points. I think just to clarify around the gap that Mr. Rose is alluding to between his promoted site and Thorpe Hesley, which is correctly on the other side of the M1. Obviously perceived gaps are taken into account. So the scoring mechanism that you can see on page 25 of the Greenbelt Review, both the scores for 2, 3 and 4 also recognise the perception of gaps also. Thorpe Hesley is also listed in 517 as being a local service centre, which is why it's listed in the assessment of gaps between town settlements. I think in relation to the more substantive question that you just asked about the scoring mechanism and how we arrived at where a narrow gap becomes narrow, and obviously you do have to start somewhere, and there's got to be an element of judgment, but 518 provides quite a useful description of where we looked at gaps that are perceived to be gaps between settlements and how wide they are to get an understanding of what typically is a narrow gap between settlements before settlements start to merge and there is no longer a gap. So the evidence is based on sort of practical understanding of how settlements have developed in and around Sheffield and some analysis of what those gaps look like. Sorry, just to add to that, actually, at the end of 5.19, the last few sentences within that do note that it does reflect the fact that depending on topography, some gaps might appear wider or narrow, which clearly would impact on the score given to that parcel. So that's also clear within the text, as well as the analysis that led us to that starting point.
Okay, thank you for that. So if there's no other points on that, I think we'll move on to purpose 3. Which involved looking at the proportion of a parcel or area that serves a beneficial use. So this is purpose 3, to assist in safeguarding the countryside from encroachment rather. So there's a list in paragraph 5.22 of the features that were considered to be beneficial uses. So which included public access, outdoor sport and recreation, biodiversity and natural history, agriculture, equine uses, woodland and cemeteries, which so lots of the sites scored highly in this regard. Can you just explain, I suppose, explain this the approach that you took and how useful it is, I suppose, in assessing land against purpose 3?
Yes, of course. So, as you've noted, evaluation took account of the proportion of each area that was covered by beneficial or appropriate countryside uses, largely because the purpose is to safeguard countryside from encroachment, and so therefore it's necessary to understand the extent to which the land can be considered countryside. So the indicative uses are listed in paragraph 522 of the Greenbelt Review. I think it's worth going back to the City Region Common Approach, which is GB01, where one of the factors within there that we considered how we might assess against different purposes did talk about the extent to which an area might assist in safeguarding countryside can be assessed by identifying the number of uses which positively contribute to beneficial use of the greenbelt and can therefore be considered countryside. So the list that was drawn up is sort of taken from what is now paragraph 145 of the MPPF. It wasn't at the time, which is why the reference has changed, and that's been unpacked in paragraph 522. It is just worth noting that we do note that in paragraph 523, beneficial uses that relate to enhancing landscapes and improving damaged and derelict land, they're not included within the assessment because they don't reflect indicative countryside uses. 523 also highlights how the various beneficial and appropriate countryside uses were identified for the purposes of the assessment, so where that information was taken from. So the different layers of mapping data and site visit work and designations and understanding the function of those pieces of land as countryside. Not sure I can take that point too much further.
So it's very much based on function rather than any kind of assessment of quality at this stage, is that?
Yes, that's right. It's not about visual quality or quality in terms of how well used it is, for example, or the quality of the countryside use on it. Is it countryside use? Is that land in countryside use right now? And from that point, we can then analyse the extent to which a piece of land is safeguarding countryside from encroachment from development.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any comments on that, Mr?
Is the approach or methodology for assessing this purpose useful or not? I think this simple answer to that is no. And that's self-evident by the scores that are reached within the methodology, where of the 75 parcels assessed, 70 of those score a 5. It's not allowing for any kind of sophistication or proper assessment or comparison between parcels when so many score the same score, get the same score. Going back to my comments on the purpose 1, the council referenced the Barnsley Greenbelt Review and how that's followed the common approach from the 2014 document. They've applied a different approach. They've assessed beneficial uses, but in a different way. They've assessed the number of beneficial uses per site, and it results in a more nuanced approach and a greater range of scoring. And so it comes back to the point that I just don't think the approach taken here really allows this purpose to be properly assessed. And if this purpose is going to be factored into assessment of the suitability of sites to be removed from the greenbelt, a more sophisticated approach should be taken account of, that allows for sites to be